Namibia, officially the Republic of Namibia, is a country on the west coast of southern Africa. Its borders include the Atlantic Ocean to the west, Angola and Zambia to the north, Botswana to the east and South Africa to the south. In the northeast, approximating a quadrupoint, Zimbabwe lies less than 200 meters, 660 feet, away along the Zambezi River, Zambia. Its capital and largest city is Windhoek. The driest country in sub-Saharan Africa, Namibia has been inhabited since prehistoric times by the Khoi, San, Damara, and Nama people. Around the 14th century, immigrating Bantu peoples arrived as part of the Bantu expansion. From 1600 the Ovambo formed kingdoms. In 1884, the German Empire established rule over most of the territory, forming a colony known as German Southwest Africa. Between 1904 and 1908, German troops waged a punitive campaign against the Herero and Nama which escalated into the first genocide of the 20th century. German rule ended during the First World War with a 1915 defeat by South African forces. In 2021, German and Namibian diplomats created a reconciliation agreement acknowledging atrocities from the German colonial period. In 1920, after the end of the war, the League of Nations mandated administration of the colony to South Africa. From 1948, with the National Party elected to power, this included South Africa applying apartheid to what was then known as Southwest Africa. In the later 20th century, uprisings and demands for political representation resulted in the United Nations assuming direct responsibility over the territory in 1966. But South Africa maintained de facto rule until 1973, when the UN recognized the Southwest Africa People's Organization, SWAPO, as the official representative of the Namibian people. Namibia gained independence from South Africa on March 21, 1990, following the South African Border War. However, Walvis Bay and the Penguin Islands remained under South African control until 1994. Namibia is a stable parliamentary democracy. Agriculture, tourism, and the mining industry, including mining for gem diamonds, uranium, gold, silver, and base metals, form the basis of its economy, while the manufacturing sector is comparatively small. Despite significant GDP growth since its independence, poverty and inequality remain significant in the country. 40.9% of the population is affected by multidimensional poverty, and more than 400,000 people continue to live in informal housing. Income disparity in the country is one of the world's highest with a Gini coefficient of 59.1 in 2015. With a population of 3.1 million people, Namibia is one of the most sparsely populated countries in the world. Since the end of the Cold War, it has attracted notable immigration from Germany, Angola, and Zimbabwe. From 1904 to 1907, the Herero and the Namakwa took up arms against ruthless German settlers. In a calculated punitive action by the German settlers, government officials ordered the extinction of the natives in the Ova Herero and Namakwa genocide. In what has been called the first genocide of the 20th century, the Germans systematically killed 10,000 Nama, half the population, and approximately 65,000 Herero, about 80% of the population. The survivors, when finally released from detention, were subjected to a policy of dispossession, deportation, forced labor, racial segregation, and discrimination in a system that in many ways foreshadowed the apartheid established by South Africa in 1948. Most Africans were confined to so-called native territories, which under South African rule after 1949 were turned into homelands, Bantustans. Some historians have speculated that the downfall of the Herero in Namibia was a model for the Nazis in the Holocaust. The memory of what happened under German rule has contributed to shape the ethnic identity in independent Namibia and has kept its significance in today's relations with Germany. The German Minister for Development Aid apologized for the Namibian genocide in 2004. However, the German government distanced itself from this apology. Only in 2021 did the German government acknowledge the genocide and agreed to pay €1.1 billion over 30 years in community aid. During World War I, South African troops under General Louis Botha occupied the territory and deposed the German colonial administration. It permitted the South African government to administer Southwest Africa until that territory's inhabitants were prepared for political self-determination. South Africa interpreted the mandate as a veiled annexation and made no attempt to prepare Southwest Africa for future autonomy. South Africa began imposing apartheid, its codified system of racial segregation and discrimination, on Southwest Africa during the late 1940s. Black Southwest Africans were subject to pass laws, curfews, and a host of residential regulations that restricted their movement. Development was concentrated in the southern region of the territory adjacent to South Africa, known as the Police Zone, where most of the major settlements and commercial economic activity were located. Outside the Police Zone, indigenous peoples were restricted to theoretically self-governing tribal homelands. After independence, Namibia has 13 cities, governed by municipalities, and 26 towns, governed by town councils. The capital Windhoek is by far the largest urban settlement in Namibia. Typically the subtropical high-pressure belt, with frequent clear skies, provides more than 300 days of sunshine per year. It is situated at the southern edge of the tropics. The Tropic of Capricorn cuts the country about in half. Namibia is the driest country in sub-Saharan Africa and depends largely on groundwater, with an average rainfall of about 350 millimeters. Namibia has various species of wildlife including the wild dog, dik-dik, and critically endangered black rhino. There are 200 terrestrial mammal species, 645 bird species and 115 fish species. In 2023, the Global Firepower Index, GFP, reported that Namibia's military is ranked as one of the weakest in the world, at 123rd out of 145 countries. Among 34 African countries, Namibia is also poorly ranked at the 28th position. Human rights. Namibia is one of the most free and democratic countries in Africa, with a government that maintains and protects human rights and freedoms. However, significant issues include government corruption, policy inertia, and prison overcrowding. Also, refugees are not permitted free movement. Homosexual acts were formerly illegal in Namibia, although the respective law was not enforced. Discrimination, as well as intolerance, against LGBT people is widespread, specifically in rural areas. Urban areas are generally neutral or supportive with a few LGBT-dedicated clubs and events. Some Namibian government officials and high-profile figures, such as Namibia's Ombudsman John Walters and First Lady Monica Gangos, had called for sodomy and homosexuality to be decriminalized and are in favor of LGBT rights. In 2023, the Supreme Court ruled that same-sex marriages legally made outside of Namibia must be recognized by the government. In 2024, the Windhoek High Court ruled the ban on homosexual acts between men to be unconstitutional. In November 2018, it was reported that 32% of women aged 15 to 49 experienced violence and domestic abuse from their spouses/partners, and 29.5% of men believe that physical abuse towards their wife/partner is acceptable, although this is typically in rural areas. The Namibian constitution guarantees the rights, freedoms, and equal treatment of women in Namibia. On SWAPO, the ruling party in Namibia, has adopted a zebra system, which ensures a fair balance of both genders in government and equal representation of women in the Namibian government. Namibia has a highly developed banking and financial services sector with modern infrastructures, such as online banking and cell phone banking. The Bank of Namibia is the central bank of Namibia, responsible for performing all other functions ordinarily performed by a central bank. There are 5 bone-authorized commercial banks in Namibia. The country's unemployment rate was 33.4% in 2018, with a labor force of 1,090,153. As of 2023, the country has a youth unemployment rate of 38.4%, one of the highest in the world. However, Namibia has a high percentage of skilled labor relative to SADC countries and have relatively low unemployment rates for skilled workers. To fight high unemployment, particularly amongst the youth, the government approved the introduction of an internship tax incentive program aimed at incentivizing employers to enroll more interns by providing an additional corporate tax deduction. In 2004, a Labor Act was passed to protect people from job discrimination stemming from pregnancy and HIV/AIDS status. In early 2010, the Government Tender Board announced that henceforth 100% of all unskilled and semi-skilled labor must be sourced, without exception, from within Namibia. In 2013, global business and financial news provider Bloomberg named Namibia the top emerging market economy in Africa and the 13th best in the world. Only 4 African countries made the top 20 emerging markets list in the March 2013 issue of Bloomberg Markets magazine, and Namibia was rated ahead of Morocco, 19th, South Africa, 15th, and Zambia, 14th. Thank you for using Panopreter Basic. Worldwide, Namibia also fared better than Hungary, Brazil, and Mexico. Bloomberg Markets magazine ranked the top 20 based on more than a dozen criteria. The data came from Bloomberg's own financial market statistics, IMF forecasts, and the World Bank. The countries were also rated on areas of particular interest to foreign investors: the ease of doing business, the perceived level of corruption, and economic freedom. To attract foreign investment, the government has made improvement in reducing red tape resulted from excessive government regulations, making Namibia one of the least bureaucratic places to do business in the region. Facilitation payments are occasionally demanded by customs due to cumbersome and costly customs procedures. Namibia is also classified as an upper-middle income country by the World Bank, and ranks 87th out of 185 economies in terms of ease of doing business. The cost of living in Namibia is slightly above average because most goods, including cereals, need to be imported. Its capital city, Windhoek, is the 150th most expensive place in the world for expatriates to live. Tax in Namibia is less than South African. This makes it favorable for wealthy South Africans to migrate to Namibia given their similar cost of living, cultures, and socio-economic factors. In 2024, the government announced in its FY 2024/25 budget statement that personal income tax would be lowered. Despite the remote nature of much of the country, Namibia has seaports, airports, highways, well-maintained roads, infrastructure, and railways, narrow gauge. It is an important regional transportation hub for its seaports and trade with landlocked neighboring countries. The Central Plateau already serves as a transportation corridor from the more densely populated north to South Africa, the source of 4/5 of Namibia's imports. Agriculture. About half of the population depends on agriculture, largely subsistence agriculture, for its livelihood, but Namibia must still import some of its food. Although per capita GDP is 5 times the per capita GDP of Africa's poorest countries, the majority of Namibia's people live in rural areas and have a subsistence way of life. Namibia has one of the highest rates of income inequality in the world, due in part to the fact that there is an urban economy and a more rural cashless economy. The inequality figures thus take into account people who do not actually rely on the formal economy for their survival. Although arable land accounts for